Let's talk to Niall Dickson. He's Chief Executive of the NHS Confederation, which represents different groups within the health service. Niall Dickson, do you believe the government when they say they can get to 25,000 by the end of April?
Well, I don't know is the short answer. I mean, I think we thought it was going to be a bit quicker than that, so it seems to have been a bit slower than we thought. I mean, I don't want to be, heavily critical of people at the centre, and I'm sure everybody is trying their best, but I do think we should have done staff testing in particular, which is what we've been going on about, because there's no doubt that there are staff who are there and who could work. If they'd been tested, they could have got back more quickly.
That's the key thing, isn't it? I can understand that will be a number one priority, to try and test NHS staff who are self-isolating, to be able to provide the reassurance that they're free to get back to work.
Yes, that's the critical thing. I mean, it's not a panacea, let's be clear, because first of all, the test doesn't really work effectively unless you're showing symptoms. But I think the idea that you could, for example, start to test members of the families of staff where they're self-isolating because one of their staff, I heard today, it was actually a chief executive, not a clinician, and they were able to go on working from home, but they had, their daughter had a temperature for one day.
Right.
And of course they go, oh my goodness, now I've got to self-isolate. Now if you imagine that was a member of frontline staff, you really want to just try and see if you can test as quickly as possible for that person. As I say, it's not absolutely ideal, and it may be, you don't pick up, they have got the virus and they haven't got enough of it yet in order to show the test. So it's not perfect, but I think we would have been able to get more staff back, and I think that's the key point. And it's better to look forward and look back. Let's see as quickly as possible if we can get more staff tested. The other key thing that the government is working flat out to do is this so-called antibody test. That's have I had it, not have I got it. And the have I had it test, if it can be done quickly, and they've ordered 3.5 million of these things, they're testing out how effective it is. And they're right, there's no point in putting out a test that doesn't really work. But if they're absolutely sure that this thing is effective, then the sooner they get that out, the better, because, again, people who've had it, staff in particular, and they must be the first priority, can then get back to work, because it's shortage of staffs, especially, the specialist kind of staff that we need to deal with these kind of situations where people need special lung care, as it were, that we're desperately short of.
It is confusing, isn't it? And I think maybe, I'm cautious to try and separate these two types of test and in conversations about this so that we'd retain some degree of clarity. Why do you think the government acquired 3 million or so of these things if they didn't know the efficacy of them?
Well, I guess you'd be criticising if they then said we need to, so I don't know the details of exactly how and where these were produced, but my understanding is they've got access to 3.5 million, but they are very keen to make sure that everything is new here, remember, because this is a new virus. So all the tests are new. Everybody is developing things at high speed. I think it probably would be negligent if they said, well, obviously you have to have the test, then you start trying it out and seeing how effective it is, and then you said, oh, well, let's start the manufacture now. I think the answer is they've obviously gambled in some way, or maybe they were produced for some other purpose. I would never criticize if they're speeding things up in this regard, and everybody, of course, is to a certain extent, including those at the centre and the so-called experts and everything else. They are working in the dark, and they are doing new things all the time.
I suppose if criticism there is, it's perhaps in managing expectations. And let me put that thought to you vis-à-vis this new Nightingale Hospital. An incredible achievement. I think most people, everybody perhaps, would agree. But 16,000 staff might be needed to operate that thing if it's going to have 4,000 patients inside. Is that achievable, Neil?
Well, first of all, I think it's 3,500, not 4,000 is my understanding, that they're absolute max. I think and it's being organised, it's not obviously being organised by the hospital, it's being organised across London and indeed from elsewhere. I mean, it is a good question. I mean, the first thing is, I think there are two things. The normal staffing stuff that you might expect probably won't apply in a hospital like this for two reasons. Well, obviously, because you can only work with what you've got. The first thing is line of sight is very different different. So in a normal intensive care unit, well, of course, you're working one nurse to one patient. I mean, that's never going to happen. And this is not an intensive care unit. It's a lung failure unit. So it's different, and it's doing different things. So the answer is you will be able to use, and they hope to be able to use, for example, I don't know, an orthopedic surgeon or a pharmacist. These are people who are very used to working in clinical environments. They're not experts in treating, so you have to use the sort of the anaesthetists, the intensive care nurses, all these kind of people who are used to, but they will be in smaller numbers, and then they'll be supervising a kind of army of people who act as runners, supporters, all sorts of things in order to make this happen. So I think there's a reasonable degree of confidence. We'll have to see how it goes. Certainly for the first phase, where they're opening up with, I think, 500 beds. They're hoping by Friday, and then they'll see how the demand goes and ramping up from there. But everybody is feeling their way. So in answer to your question, will they be able to find the staff to do it? They're pretty confident that that they're on the right track, but as somebody said to me this morning, listen, plans change hour by hour. So, there is no final plan here. Everybody is trying to do it. And I agree with you. I watched, as you probably did, the film of China building that hospital, and you kind of went, wow, we'd never be able to do that here. Wow, we've done something much more spectacular, actually, the biggest hospital in the world, and that's going to be followed by other huge hospitals in Manchester and Cardiff, Glasgow, and Birmingham. So, we are gearing up to do that. I think the other question, though, one of the things that Nightingale may be able to do, which people have not talked about, is that if it gets up and running, it's not going to be accepting patients sort of off the street, as it were, or via ambulance. It'll be taking patients from other hospitals, so they'll be ventilated on their way there. But in time, what it ought to be able to do is relieve some of those hospitals and maybe allow them to start doing some of the, not kind of business as usual, but catching up with the unmet need, because none of this is no cost. All the other treatments which should be happening now in relation to strokes and hearts and cancer, they're not all being stopped by any manner of means, but there are definitely, there's demand that's not being met at the moment, and that dealing with that is going to be a big issue going forward.
Neil, just a final thought. It's not too naive, is it, to wonder at the ability of NHS staff to improvise in a circumstance like this?
No, I mean, I think everybody is in an improvised mode. I think my biggest fear is not, I mean, I think staff are able to improvise, and people, and certainly things like the regulators have all changed their views about what people can do and can't do. So it's a much more flexible system. I think my bigger worry is actually about staff anxiety and staff. I mean, because I think somebody put it to me, my family are worried about going to Sainsbury's. If you're worried about going to Sainsbury's, what does it feel like if you're heading into the front line and on a ward? And I think we really need to do everything we can to support those staff, give them the kit they need, give them the testing they need, support them in every possible way to make sure that they are as safe and well as we can make them in fighting this battle for us.